This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. I've got a special treat for you today. This is a two-parter episode with my sister podcast, Hello Print Friend. Hello, Miranda. Miranda and I decided to band together and do a two-part interview with one person, Luther Davis, and he is the subject of my interview today. He is the head of the print shop at the newly opened, about a year long, Powerhouse Arts in Gowanus, Brooklyn. And they are doing amazing and fabulous things. It's quite an incredible facility. We are doing it as a two-parter. If you are interested in Luther's past in his early life and how he came to love print in the first place, you want to go check out his interview with Miranda at Hello Print Friend. And if you want to hear about the present occurrences at Powerhouse Arts and its future, you want to stick with me and listen to our talk. We talked for a long time about all sorts of things, so hopefully you'll love it. All right, housekeeping. I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway-Conoway people. Images will be over at platemarkpodcast.com, and please do me a favor and hit support and donate. Help me keep the lights on here at Platemark. I really appreciate it. All right, let's get rolling. Luther, it's wonderful to see you. Welcome to Platemark.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Ann. I'm a big fan. Listened to just about every episode, and I love the format. So,
Thanks.
It's
been really fun. I get to meet and learn about all kinds of people and all kinds of moments in the ecosystem. It's amazing to me how many roles there are and how different everybody's roles are, and you can just find your own niche and off you're running. All right,
Sure.
So can you explain who you are for our people listening?
My name's Luther Davis. He, him. I'm the director and one of the master printers at Powerhouse Arts print shop. We are located on the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, historically Lenape lands. Gowanus is named a Canarsie Lenape chief, so it's like part of the language here that we don't acknowledge, so I'd like to acknowledge that. Powerhouse Arts is a nonprofit that was started about a decade ago to preserve a former Brooklyn Rapid Transit power station. So back before that, the MTA, companies had their own train lines. And so the Brooklyn Rapid Transit station that we're in, the power plant, I should say, comprises a turbine hall and a boiler house. And it was built about 120 years ago. And the turbine hall is the 120-year-old structure that Powerhouse was formed to protect and restore and turn into an arts something at the time. We had a series of roundtables with artists and fabricators to discuss what could be a meaningful contribution to the New York real estate, art real estate, if you will. We settled on the fact that over the course of a summer that fabricators, and this is not unique to New York or Brooklyn, but fabricators are being pushed out of the center of many of our urban areas, and industrial zones are being shrunk or done away with. And that for artists in New York, they're having to travel to 3 states to get things made. And so, if you're an independent artist and you've got to go to a metal shop here and a wood shop here and a print shop here, you're spending a lot of your time, traveling. And so as we look at the landscape and the changing landscape on the Gowanus Canal, we have to acknowledge the fact that it was an industrial zone for most of its history. And so it has recently been rezoned to be residential. And we landmarked our building and landmarked it industrial right before the switch.
Oh, well done.
So, yeah, it's an interesting time. As we look out our print shop windows, we see 8,000 apartment units being added right now around us.
I believe it.
It is wild, but they've cleaned up part of the emphasis between the sort of revitalization of this neighborhood is that they've cleaned up the canal, which is a super fun site. They've spent 4 years-ish dredging it, and now they're currently capping it with layers of carbon, gravel, clay, and then it'll be capped. And there will be 18 acres of parks running up and down it. So it's really an interesting time to be here. But as we were sitting here building our shop out, we're watching wood shops and metal shops, one-story buildings being knocked down.
Oh, of course.
So, part of our call is to preserve the jobs, preserve the spaces, but also educate the public as to what fabricators do and how vital they are to the art ecosystem.
Okay. Before we go too much farther, I want to say that this is a part two, a two-parter that we're doing with our sister podcast, Hello Print Friend. And you and Miranda have already had your conversation where you went through your past and how you got to where you are. And our plan is to talk about the present and the future.
Yes.
Right.
This is quite an honor to be this mashup and true collaboration. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, right. It's yes, in keeping. Yeah, Miranda and I have each been on each other's podcasts, and we travel in very similar manners, hitting on different sectors of the ecosystem, as it were. But there are these moments when we intersect, and when we both were, because you guys just opened Powerhouse Arts, that we both had contacted you, and she said, "Why don't we do it together?" So here we are. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually in Instagram, which is luther.printshop, plug in my Instagram. We're DMing, I'm like, I've already agreed to one. So, and I'm so happy that you were able to speak about the mashup. Well, the ecosystem, I love that you use the word ecosystem because it truly is an ecosystem,
Yeah. I don't know when that sort of started being used, but I hear more and more people using it. I'm like, yes, it's catching on. Mm-hmm. All right. So I know you talked a lot with Miranda about where you have come from, but can you just quickly tell us how you got to where you are?
Yeah, the recap is that I studied print in a liberal arts school and did not get into any graduate programs. So I took continuing ed print classes at Ohio State and got my MFA at Ohio State. Took a 2-year program, turned into 3 years with the continuing ed. So I'm a big believer in adult education because it's what got me where I am. And then painted houses, set up my own shop in Columbus. Did not like working by myself in my own shop. Painting houses during the day and going back and being by yourself was just not what I could do. Moved to New York and got a job in a fine art print shop. And some of my first jobs were working with art heroes, picking up the phone and, this is Bob. And I'm like, Bob who? Bob Rauschenberg, and you're like, oh, I should learn how to talk politely on the phone.
You never know.
Yeah. So, and, it was an interesting time, 90s. We were in the meatpacking district. There was art everywhere, but, there were shifts of actual meat coming in, and the culture in the meatpacking district changed every 6 hours, and there's a vibrant nightlife there. So you could just sit etching a plate. My first job was to etch a Richard Serra plate. It was a 1/4-inch thick piece of copper, and I etched it like throughout the night. And I just looked out the window and watched in awe how amazing New York was. So really fell in love with New York. And then from there, that shop became Axel Editions, which for 15 years was in downtown-ish Brooklyn. And then that tragically folded with the death of the owner of Axel. And we joined Powerhouse as like a test case for their model of preserving fabrication, and eventually became part of Powerhouse. We were briefly something called BRT Print Shop, Brooklyn Rapid Transit Print Shop, which was a fun little 3-year window. And then now we're part of Powerhouse Arts. And currently I have a wonderful print team. Some of them have been with me for 23 years. So it's a very seasoned team of John Bartolo, Nellie Davis, Dennis Hiroshik, Chris Kinsler, Dana Zinzer, and Zaire Anderson. If I ever say I printed something, that's false. We work in teams. We always work together. We call them projects because not everything's an edition. We do a lot of screen printing. Screen printing is our primary print form. We also do some etching, some woodcut, and some very large, like 10-foot wide digital printing. But screen printing is what we're known for. So screen printing being very adaptable, very fluid. We're doing a lot of one-off screen prints on weird materials, big sculptures, little things. It's an industrial process truly that we're treating sort of a mishmash of experimental printmaking, also, printing on architectural things if needed. So really we try to do everything that comes our way if we can. But back to the ecosystem, there are print shops around us. Before the pandemic, pulled in Brooklyn, International Print Center did a showcase of like 19 print shops in Brooklyn, and they weren't able to get to all the print shops. There still were many more print shops that they didn't quite touch on.
Roberta Waddell was the curator of that one, wasn't she?
Yes, and
yes.
Samantha
Ripner.
Yeah, Ripner.
Right, Samantha Ripner. Yeah, they're both fabulous colleagues. I love them both.
Oh yeah, and so much fun to work with. I was sort of like a guest inspirer towards like the vibrancy of Brooklyn. And Brooklyn has a huge history. The ecosystem after the pandemic, I'll just speak to this briefly. After the pandemic, every Friday I tried to visit a different print shop.
Oh, cool.
And every Friday I would find out about 3 print shops I'd never heard of. So it really is a huge ecosystem here. The transportation department has their own print shop. The sanitation department has their own print shop and their own artist-in-residence program. Yeah, and we're not even getting the fact that there's the New York Times, and there's an industry magazine, and there's, Dugal, and there's these huge firms that do massive printing and billboards. Right now, on the Brooklyn Library, the entire front of it is printed Jay-Z lyrics and done in the most masterfully. I'm like, the research just on the adhesive alone to stick to a building. So, it's it's around you all the time. And so that, within walking distance, like a very, very short walk, I'm at Jungle Press, like they're kitty corner to us. But we have Radix Media, New York Print Graphics, Do Good Press, Carousel's Press, K-Rock. The list goes on and on and on. Bushwick Print Lab, there's just so many. And I can walk to all these, well, maybe not all the way to K-Rock, and then we're not even getting to Queens, right? That's just in Brooklyn. So it really is a vibrant ecosystem. And it's been this way for a long time. The Gowanus Canal, if you look back 100 years ago, so 1922, Ulano, and Ulano's still here. Ulano is one of the major manufacturers of screen printing emulsions and Ruby Lip. They invented that. As far as I know, they're here. They're a few blocks away, and they're still here. They're now a part of Kiwo, also an amazing company. 100 years ago, and I did the research, and 100 years ago, 38.5% of the country's ink was made here.
What?
Yeah, was made in New York, and most of it on the Gowanus Canal. So when we're talking about cleaning up the canal, we're really talking about paint and ink, runoff. No one cared 100 years ago about the canal. In Red Hook, which is a community not far from us, they were making paint and varnishes. So, there was a huge industry of print here in New York, and it always has been.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
there's some small print shops in Baltimore, but I couldn't go. I could probably go for maybe 2 months on Fridays and hit all of them.
Yeah, I just it's really pretty fun. Also, there's I'll print on anything shops too. Mm-hmm. Where you walk by and you're they have mugs and iPhones, and there's there's this customization niche market here. Every 10 blocks there's one of those print shops too. But Powerhouse Arts is unique in that we also have a ceramic shop that's really beautiful. We have metal and wood, and we have large CNC machine, and we just have a Workspace 11, a metal fabricator move in, so they have a water jet cutter. So that as a group within this building, we're doing some cross-media collaboration. It is really pretty exciting. So speaking of the future, this building is designed to have many, many state-of-the-art, and when I say state-of-the-art, the state-of-the-art ventilation, plumbing, electricity. From the beginning, this building is built around health and safety of artists and craftspeople in a way that has never really been thought out fully. So we had some wonderful engineers on this project asking each of the areas, what do you need to be safe? What's your ideal conditions? And then upping that, future-proofing, so that we can add on and build out. So this building currently has some spaces that will steward, and some programming will be added over the next few years. the ceramic shop has a digital ceramics printer that I'm dying to use.
Oh, cool.
So you can use, you can print glazes basically in digital. And they just got a ram press, which takes two molds and squishes them together with clay inside. As far as I'm concerned, that's printy, right? And so you can squish two molds together and get multiples that way. So I'm excited for that. And slip casting and such. And
wow. So my question has to do with the organization of the whole. So as different fabrication elements come in and move in, are they independents that are renting space from this larger organization, or are they co-op members of Powerhouse Arts? How does it work?
That's a great question. Currently, Powerhouse Arts official programming are ceramics, print, and something called public art, which is a loose term that deals with larger scale, maybe they're small scale, but public works, for example, that might be installed in the High Line or in Times Square, that bring in fabricators from multiple disciplines and sort of coalesces around a project. So they project manage big projects through multiple fabricators and in-house as well. And then there are spaces that we're stewarding, and those spaces are going to be slowly filling as we find like-minded nonprofits. So the way that they enter the space will be fleshed out as each program comes in. So we are trying to do some development around some areas so we can raise funds to start programs and have like bespoke programming. So what we've found out is that what works for print doesn't necessarily work in ceramics. So ceramics is set up as a membership shop with some amazing professional fabrication services. So it's not a teaching shop. They don't teach classes, but it's all geared around working artists and preserving their time. And their time is sacred. So the artists won't be interrupted by 101 type style classes, but we might bring in experts in the field to teach. And so I don't sort of edged around your question a little bit, because as each room is filled, it might be a community class or something that fills the space for just like a year or just for a few months. So I think that as the programming slowly shapes, and we've only been in the building for about a year, a little over a year and a half. So it's a growing model, and as we add on people with expertise, that model is changing.
Yeah, right. No, that makes sense, I think. So before we started rolling, you were walking me around the space. It's gigantic. Can you describe the physical plant?
The physical plant is 170,000 square feet. We have, as I mentioned, some bespoke areas that are designed to be wood and metal and print and ceramics. And then we have a large event hall that is a place for performances and print fairs. Putting that, I'm just going to keep saying that until it happens, but it will happen. Print fairs and community events and rentals as well. So a way of subsidizing our programming is to rent the space out for like-minded sort of events. So we had a Creative Time gala here. Creative Time is an amazing New York arts organization that does public artwork. And so there's a queue of some really interesting events that are going to be happening in the hall.
But no weddings?
No weddings. They'd be very arty if they are. But yeah, it would be a great place to have a wedding.
It would be a great. I'm amazed it's not on the table.
The arts in New York is, once again, use the word ecosystem, very diverse. So there's fashion shoots that'll be happening and fashion launches. It depends on the season what's going to be happening there, I imagine. Because every arts industry has their own season, right? So print fair is like around Halloween, right? That's our time to shine, but everyone else has other times. So it'll be fun to see. As I mentioned earlier, we've preserved something called the Turbine Hall, which was a 5-story Romanesque, I don't even know. I'm not an architect, but I think Romanesque barn. So it's just a 5-story barn that had 6 4-story turbines in it. Oh. And that generated all of the electricity for the subway streetcars and trains in Brooklyn, and we had streetcars back then. And then on the other side of the building that was knocked down sometime in the 50s was something called the boiler house, which generated all of the steam for the turbines. So truly steam era technology. That was knocked down. And initially they burned coal And so you can imagine what that did to the site. We've remediated the site, cleaned up the site to EPA standards, and are monitoring the groundwater and making sure that we, as stewards of this land, are keeping it clean and trying to adopt safe artist practices, not only health and safety, but disposal of chemistry, protecting the water in and water out, protecting the land around us. So it's key part of our programming is environmental initiatives and also fantasizing about how we can, the waste stream from the metal shop, we're hoping to use in the print shop, right, in our intaglio processes. And so what does that mean? And where can our waste ink go to benefit a community print shop at some point? And not that it's waste, it's, you mix too much ink. So a lot of thought as to how we can be sort of self-contained, health and safety and environmentally, which is fun to think about.
Right, of course. So was there an original mastermind who thought all the way through these minor permutations as life went on? Or how did this all come about?
So the nonprofit was started by Josh Recknitz, who wanted to preserve this building. This building, and I've glossed over one of its most glorious time periods, was known as the Bat Cave, when it was unguarded for about a decade. And it was a place for artists to squat and to make work. And so there's graffiti all over the building that we've kept. We haven't tried to clean up the building. There's a whole community in here for about a decade using the space. So in honoring them, their time, we are preserving a lot of what they did to the building as far as graffiti, but we're also trying to preserve the mindset of being welcoming and taking on work from as many different groups as possible. Key part of the visioning of this is, and this came through the series of roundtables I mentioned that were hosted by Triple Canopy, which is, if you don't know, they're a very interesting arts organization. Part of when we talk about health and safety, we also talk about that the access to the arts, especially fabrication arts, can be limited and intimidating. So if you approach a printer and you're not using the jargon of the print process, it's hard to explain what you want. If I were to go and request a metal job, I can do it and I can assemble it in my mind, but I would be ad hocing using common language to describe the process. And that's really tough for artists when they are jumping into new areas. There's a gatekeeping that happens with fabricators, and if you're not using the right language, you maybe get an automatic 20% surcharge, right? How can we lower barriers for entry? How can we make sure that people who have ideas can get access to fabricators and not limited out of the gate based on their way of speaking about their project? So that part of the vision question for what this was thought out pretty well through our roundtables. Certainly there was a pre-pandemic model where the whole building was populated by Powerhouse. We had 200 employees and none of the windows open because it was a self-contained environment. And the pandemic, that's been scaled back to a degree to be, the windows all open now, so we can get some fresh air if needed, but also to think about what it means to have something that's a little bit more nimble to the community needs. So they will be the spaces will be stewarded over time and sort of be a little bit more fluid.
So if I wandered in today, I'm in Baltimore, so I won't, don't worry.
Oh, you will be wandering in at some point, I insist.
No,
but you'll need to make an appointment.
Well, that's a good thing to know. Yeah. Are there artist studios in the offing?
So there's no artist studios per se. There's no white rooms with white walls and a sink. There are a lot of those in New York, and there's a lot within walking distance of us. There's some amazing arts. There's a Can Factory, Kitty Corners, Art Gowanus. There's a major effort to preserving spaces for artists, quote unquote, and usually they're not thinking printmakers, right? They're thinking painters, drawers, sculptors when they're thinking out. And who are they? I don't know who they are. But after explaining that I'm an artist and then saying over my 30-year history of doing this, and then saying I'm a printer, and then explaining that I don't print T-shirts, I know that most people think of art as painting. There's a lot of spaces for that. So in this building, it's much more about fabrication spaces, artists having bench space or shelf space or locker space so that they can come in, work on their projects, and in an environment with a lot of tools, a lot of other people working on things, and then leave and come back the next day and pick up their project, like not take it off the table sort of mentality. But there's no like solo booths for people to work in.
Okay. I just feel like the art world is, as you said, the painters are all in their own little spaces, and then there's the rest of the people who are working in teams to accomplish things. And it's like the Powerhouse Arts is this utopian this other side of it.
Yes.
Right.
Well, part of that other side is that there is the myth of the solo artist is how you sell art, right? In the galleries, you go in, you see an artist's work. There are plenty of solo artists. There are plenty, the bulk of artists are solo to some degree, but the art industry has a huge army of fabricators that are either working directly with artists in the artist studio or as outside contractors. And so part of Powerhouse mission is to really showcase that side of the art industry, to pull back the curtain on the fact that when you go to see an artist show at a major gallery in New York, there might be 30 people who worked on a piece. They're not named. There's some artists who will name all of their fabricators, which is what we would like more of. I just recently had a discussion with a publisher that we were going to talk with. Part of our contract is that when asked, you have acknowledged that Powerhouse Arts print shop made your print. You're not allowed to hide it or claim that you made it. And so we got into the discussion of why that's important and why it's important to showcase that other people make art. Is that we want this industry to be in the lens so that more people can enter it. Straight from, if you love making something, there are jobs to make stuff. But in school, at least I wasn't taught that you could be a collaborating fabricator that's just not something we were taught. It was the solo art path. And there's a huge industry of fabrication in New York City. What's interesting, though, is that if you were to do like a U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics search of New York, like New York is a cultural artist hub, you would find that there are very few artists. There's more artists in Texas and Alaska than there are in New York, and that's because, yes, and here's why. It's a loophole in the system. If you're a self-employed artist, you don't register on the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So here's the catch-22 of the New York art scene. I can't throw a kneaded eraser out the window without hitting an artist. But they all are like on their taxes, they're self-employed. So they don't actually fit within this niche, right? But we as artists are not we're working together. So, and really this, I'm long-winded way of saying like, let's talk about art the way it's really made. And that's really what Powerhouse's mission is.
Well, and I think I've said this before, I can't remember which episode, even the painters, like you mentioned before we started rolling, that you were working on an Amy Sherald project, and we visited her studio at Mana Contemporary a couple years ago, and there were 6 assistants in there finishing the painting. Mm-hmm. The blades of grass, like not, just like in the old days when Benjamin West had 25 kids doing the drapery or whatever, right? So the myth of the solo artist, I think you're absolutely right, is complete bonkers. Yeah.
And what's funny is when I'm trying to like not pin the blame, but I'm trying to figure out where that shift happened, because during the Renaissance no one had this idea that it was a factory. Like, right? Michelangelo had a team, he had a crew, he had a project manager, right? And he had patrons that were coming in and eating wine and cheese, So I think I'm not going to blame Leo Castelli, since I just mentioned I printed his 90th birthday portfolio, but at some point when the narrative of the solo struggling artists and their unique story became the prevalent way of selling art, we switched, right? We switched to this current form, contemporary, modern. I don't know when it happened. Probably Impressionist era? Yeah, I mean, I'm not an art historian, but...
Well, I'm trying to think. Like even Matisse in the during the war and during the 40s, he would go to work every day in a tie and a three-piece suit and paint in the morning and draw in the afternoon, or vice versa, I forget. That even then with his, I'm all creative and all that, it was a job. Like his job was a painter, and his daughter was the manager of the studio, and she was the one who was dealing with the sales and blah, blah, blah. Maybe it was Picasso,
Maybe it could be.
because he perfected
for those
everything.
of you who couldn't see, Anne was shaking her fist at the sky when she said the word Picasso.
Well, I mean, but he's, he's like, it was certainly a job for him, but so I feel like he's a pig. Sorry, people. There was this sort of unending font of creativity that just kind of oozed out of the man from the time he was 6 to the time he died. And he seems like he shifted to everything, even printmaking, right? Like he's shifted so much of it, even though I can't stand him.
Well, let's look back when Matisse and Picasso, they went to printmakers, right? They went to studios to make their prints, right?
Absolutely.
So they went to fabricators to make their prints, and no one hid that back then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was getting my MFA and we're talking about print, and once again, I had a great education at Ohio State. Charles Massey Jr., Philip Von Robbie, wonderful faculty, taught me so much, gave me so many opportunities. But yeah, the solo practicing artists, right, in print, right? And now, by the way, I teach at Parsons New School print shop and have been for the last 23 years. And I really try to showcase the fact that we don't work in isolation. And the thing that you're falling in love with working in a print shop, right, is the thing that you can continue doing. The print shops, you don't have to do it on your... Granted, there are plenty of print shops that are solo printers. But in graduate school, name the famous printers who are only printers, right, and are on the walls of the museums and galleries. This is very hard to do. Karen Kuntz at that time, Lazansky, I don't know who. I mean, there's not a lot of people who just make prints and are in museums. They had painters, sculptors, and they did some print on the side, right? I guess the idea when I was getting my MFA and undergrad. The print shops were in the basements or being moved to ancillary facilities to make room for a computer lab. So, and I spoke a bit about this with Miranda, that, we were always on the move and always feeling like second-class citizens. And now I feel that print is such a part of artist practices. There's so many artists that are using print in some form or other. You just have to figure out where it lies, right? So many artists use print as the start of their paintings. Like we do a lot of print directly on canvas, print as
Wait. Printing on canvas as the base of an image to come?
Yeah, so it's like a coloring book, right? Or print just as a finished thing on canvas too. We do a lot of one-off work where we're printing photographs on a plank of wood that's beautifully primed and painted, and then that's sold as a painting, right? So there's a lot, as a printmaker, you go into a gallery, really digest what you're looking at, because often you're looking at a print. And so, take some time to think about what it is, or some kind of printmaking, mark making too, like a mark made and repeat, right? So the Powerhouse Arts sort of approach, and the approach I've always had towards our print shop, is that we're not necessarily trying to make additions, and that's why when we say we make projects. So there might be additions, or they might be one-offs, and we do a lot of one-off kind of work. And the beauty of the one-off silkscreen is that it's not CMYK, it's not inkjet, it's real pigment, it's real materials, and luster, and sheens, and metallics, or glow-in-the-dark, or the artist's own blood, or actually, we scratch that, we don't do blood anymore. Powerhouse Arts will not let us do blood anymore. You don't want to do blood. It's a tactile process. And
would you guys be able to do, I'm thinking of that Ed Ruscha portfolio, News, Do's, Pews, Moos, whatever it was, and it was all printed with Jello and...
Yeah, the Jello.
Jello,
and it's interesting when you print with mustard or ketchup, they don't look like mustard or ketchup.
No.
So, no, but yeah, printing foodstuffs, it's, silkscreen specifically is fun. And I do think we're in a golden age of printmaking because people use the word print. They say, it's in the news. 3D printed a gun, and 3D printed this, and we're 3D printing human blood vessels in the hope that we can 3D print a human heart soon. So the word print is a very, it's in the vernacular in a way that's different than it was. And people are using it, thinking about Star Trek, the, Earl Grey hot sort of approach to like fabricating food right in front of your face. But we are talking about 3D printing hamburgers. Yeah, 3D printing foodstuffs is like, there's a laser printer that prints an image on the perfectly crafted head of a Guinness, a pint of Guinness, right? And you can laser print like an image directly on that. So they're like, the print as entertainment is a new form, right? And the act of printing is a new thing. You can get amazing machines. When I started digitally printing, an Iris digital printer was $250,000. So no one had that. But now you can get a really high quality Epson for a small percentage of that. So, it's a good time.
It's interesting. I have two questions. One, first, and hope I get back to the second one. This idea of printing things onto the Guinness or whatever, all of a sudden it made me think back to years ago. I wrote a paper about optical aids, camera obscuras, camera lucidas, the Claude glass, whatever. And this idea that it was an entertainment to be able to see a reflection somehow contained in a smaller something or other, which is really basically a one-off print, right? Mm-hmm. It's bizarre. Like you would have something attached to your carriage and you would watch the scenery go by as you were going down the street, I mean, it's like
rather than just look out the window, right?
Right,
yes.
like moving pictures.
Yes.
It's kind of this weird entertainment thing that occurred. It's kind of enlightenment, endarkenment, whatever you want to call it. It just sort of struck me, different in parallel to prints and actual prints that were being made at the time. But anyway, sorry.
Well, I think that that's a part of. A lot of the people who interview, the beauty of print is thinking about a process in flipped, in reverse. Contemplating every mark, those sort of like traditional printmaking kind of ways of working that set you up for like a study process for something. Like, you're a painter in print, you're studying, and you're able to create work at a much faster pace, and it's maybe a little less precious in the moment, but allows you to sort of like work towards something in the future that could be incorporated in some larger artist practice. But I think that now, with the digital revolution and us all spending so much screen time, the want to get ink under your nails is real for a large group of people. And the whole make it culture, of the aughts, which whatever that is now, I think it's slightly different. But people investing in time and learning how to, make a wallet out of duct tape, right? But that's base level entry point, but the need for making stuff is ever present. I think print really does a great job of showcasing making because of its in multiple. Because you can do things in multiple, you can then get your work in multiple places, and people realize that too. Riso has skyrocketed, letterpresses resurged, silkscreen classes are all full. People want to be doing this.
I have never said the word Riso on the podcast. Can you help people understand what we're talking about?
Oh, yeah. So, and I want to just put an asterisk by this, that I have a lot of Riso friends. I've never actually made a Riso. But, but it is a really beautiful hybrid process. Risograph, RISO, is a hybrid Xerox silkscreen stencil machine, for lack of a better word. There's a drum that has a color in it. And for all you Riso printers, please excuse my way of describing it. Inside is a squeegee, quote unquote, that is pushing the ink as this drum rolls with a stencil wrapped around it, from my understanding. It's silk screen, well, it's not silk screen, but it's stenciling a color at a time onto the paper, the substrate. And so you can print, they come up in two colors, so you can put in two different colors. And they're sort of bespoke colors. There's like a Riso shop might have 20 colors or however many colors. Like, they're not taking two cartridges necessarily and mixing them together to create a new color. But two-color machine, so you could print two colors, take out those cartridges of color, and put in a new two colors with the new images on them, and print two more colors, and you, in theory, could do that for a while. It's a neat process because has a built-in noise. It has a built-in character that is identifiable. It has a look. It has a smell. Right. It has all of the things that people identify with a tangible art form, and it's fast. It's really fast. So
Yeah, they're cool. We saw a demo of a Riso studio in Kansas City. Where were we? Lawrence, probably Lawrence, and it was like an old school Xerox machine, and they were co-opting these old quote unquote technologies
yeah,
to create this whole new form. It's fascinating. They're cool, but they definitely have a look.
yeah, and for those who utilize that look, it's like it's a vernacular in itself, which I love. And so silkscreen, with also a stencil, we're talking about how you can put anything through it. It has that look of a screen in many ways, in a matrix. I really love it. But that's, as you're in print, there's been moments in time where, processes are at risk of dying, and then artists and makers pick them up. And I think the Riso phenomenon really saved Riso as a company, because it was a odd outlier of office equipment. And mimeograph, it's very similar to what a mimeograph might have been. And for those of you who don't know, mimeograph was also a stencil process. You wrapped on a drum, and a special solvent ink that ran in school. Like in 6th grade, we get these freshly mimeographed purple papers with our tests on it, and we'd all pick them up and smell them, and we were basically huffing thinner, but they smelled great, just straight out of the mimeograph. Oh, this is fresh. Whole class getting high right before they take the test. Yeah, so and that it's a modern mimeograph in many ways.
Right, we're betraying our age, people.
Yep.
So, so you keep using the term silkscreen, Luther.
Okay, yeah. So, all right. So yes, I actually in writing call it screen printing.
Me too.
And I don't use the word serigraph very often, or serigraphy. Screen printing is my preferred way of speaking about the process. We don't use silk anymore, and I have this running gag, like no one wants, instead of silk, we use polyester, and no one wants to hear a polyester print. But silkscreen is what is in the vernacular. Most people know the process as, so I'm sort of defaulting to that in this moment. But screen printing, one word, is how I refer to the process.
Me too.
And I'm flipping it around a bit. And what's interesting about the screen printing industry is that it is mostly, and I mentioned this earlier, people think of t-shirts. So when I'm describing the process, I'm like, have you ever watched a t-shirt? Or have you ever made a t-shirt? And 90% of the people at some point, they have made a t-shirt in high school or whatever. They know that process, right? Of a squeegee, going over a screen, and pushing ink onto something, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for calling me out on that.
Well, as a former cataloger, terminology was very important, and almost maniacally so. So I would do data scrubs and try and find all the silk screen and switch them all to screen print or whatever, and never serigraphy, people, please. It was just. This is what's so fascinating about this whole thing, and I'm glad we're circling back to it, because as you were describing all of the various shops in Brooklyn, you were talking about like the bespoke mug printing or the whatever, and the line between quote unquote fine art, silk screens, screen printing, serigraphy, blah blah, is so close.
It is.
It's and there. Morphs to, like, is it art? Is the drop that comes across the Brooklyn Museum with the Jay-Z lyrics, is that art? Or is it a commercial rap? And it's how different is it from the thing that you're making for Amy Sherald?
Yeah. Well, so I really think that line is so fine and it's always being crossed that that the distinction shouldn't be there. Right. And so obviously I'm not going to treat my coffee mug that's been printed, unless it's been printed by someone I know, with the same kind of respect, right, that I am going to be the fine art print that someone gives me.
But I can buy my mug for $15 and I can buy a Amy Sherald print from you for $5,000.
Yes. So right. The workmanship that goes into what quote unquote fine art now is really blurred. So that's something interesting as a fabricator in the fine art world, where there might be a lot of choices. I don't advertise do digital printing, right? The large format Epsons. Archival print is how we're calling them now, but they were called Giclée for a moment, and always hated that word. So I don't advertise that we do digital printing because I want to be a screen printer, but there's a lot of work that goes into digital printing. And so when you get into the fine art realm, what is the fine art digital print coming out of an Epson or Canon versus coming out of someone's office? It's the same machine, right? It really has to do with like the nuance of paper, the nuance of approach to color matching, and the nuance of packing the stuff at the end of the day. Like that's what they don't tell you when you enter into like a job in the arts, is that you're also going to be packing art all day long, right? So like the handling, the safe handling of stuff is a delineation between an arts fabricator and a copy shop, right? It's like you're coming up and it's carefully, archivally packed, and you can, take it on the subway, right? Versus, I don't know, a shopping bag that's shoved into.
Right, and also intention.
Yeah, well, certainly intention, but for artists making a choice between, do I print this at FedEx, or at something a little bit higher up? I think most artists, given the chance, and they're starting, there's nothing wrong with getting a good quality print at a bulk service provider, right? So the main thing is to be making the thing. And there's a lot of print shops, as we mentioned, that can put your image on anything. So I think the beauty of the age we're in now is that you can slowly dip your toe in these waters in many different ways.
With screen printing, when you have a print that is basically large, flat areas of color, and you're a museum person and you're not handling it properly.
Hell yeah. It's true.
What happens?
The safe handling of paper is a skill in itself. And I wanted to say that we aren't white glove handlers. When we're printing, we have borders that we're expecting to cut off. When you handle 100 sheets of paper in a row, you might as well have white gloves on, because your hands are clean by the time you get to your third print. One of our presses goes up to 50 by 100 inches print area, and there's no way one human being can hold that safely without destroying it, and especially when it's covered with wet ink, right? You really have to know how to handle it. We let the weight of the paper dictate how it's going to be held. We usually try to hold it in a U shape, holding opposite corners, and never bend the paper back on itself. If we're using the U, it's an AU without any serifs, right? So you're not bending the edges back. But you do that enough, and you can be very literally flippant with it. You can throw paper and have it land without damaging if you know how to handle it. In screen printing, you might fill up a rack of, usually a rack is 50 shelves. You might fill up a rack in 10 minutes. And so, so you're handling paper at a very fast pace. Maybe 10 minutes is a bit of exaggeration. One could. One was really cruising. But the handling of paper, and so we mentioned packing. So packing paper, if you're buying a print, if you're into it, you're trying to figure out whether it's going to come flat or rolled, and how do you roll a print. And the amount of money that you pay is basically the state of how many tubes and how much glassine, and, it's going to be around it.
Those tubes are expensive.
Yeah. I recently am buying paper from the West Coast, and it's my first time buying paper from a distributor, and they're going to ship it rolled. And first I started to correct, I really would love it. And then no, you handle your paper, it'll get to me safe, and then we'll judge the best way, because they're sending me 50 very thin sheets of paper. And so they can roll them, and I think that might be the better.
Well, because if you send them flat, depending on how big they are, if you send them flat, the ease of having something bad happen versus in a roll is gigantic.
So there is 100% agree, and there's a general rule if you're sending stuff is how far can you throw it? Imagine yourself delivering it, and how far can you throw it? If you feel that your package can be thrown 5 feet, it will be thrown on the truck, off the truck, right? So you have to consider the distance one can chuck it. And I once had UPS absolutely destroy something I sent. And the artist was in Texas, they blamed me. Basically UPS destroyed this small crate I made because it was a small crate that could be thrown. And it couldn't manage to be thrown. It was destroyed the first time they threw it. So then they rolled a dolly over the prints too. So there were dolly wheel marks over. It's part of the prints. and then they shoved it into a box, like just a random box, with like just shoved. Like they made a loose roll and put it in a box, and then it went there. So there was a disaster. And the artist's like, I can't believe after all this time you sent the prints this way, and they document like, no, that's not how we sent it. So back. Long story short, imagine how far you can throw your package and plan on that landing.
But what I was also thinking about was the surface of the ink sitting on the print. Like you can scrape your little fingernail across it and you get this awful scratch ding thing, and the surface is basically ruined.
Yeah. You can look at the surface and know how easily it's going to be damaged. Certain prints, and certainly traditional screen prints of the matte oil base era, have this luscious, beautiful, chalky quality and are just waiting to get damaged. Big, wet relief prints, not so much. Depending on the acrylic ink, yes, you could scratch it, or no, you could not scratch it. You know, there's Speedball professional grade ink, which scratches less than their non-professional, and they only make one color in professional. Speedball, if you're listening, I love your professional black, but you could make a few other colors in the professional line. Yeah. But big fan of Speedball. We use TW Graphics inks in our shop quite a lot, and Nasdar inks as well. And they each have a different handling. So you're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the more stuff, noise that's going on in the image, like it's the big flat areas, they're the big problem, right?
Yes.
So yeah. So like if it's a painterly screen print and there's like a bazillion colors in it, you probably won't see it as much. But
you're absolutely right. And when we're printing, like a one color print is like a red flag, like a big field of color. And we have a couple of these coming up. A big field of color where it's just going to show every imperfection. If a piece of lint gets in the wrong spot, if a fly flies in there and gets crushed, you know, whatever it is. We've done prints up to 220 different colors, and you know we can always fix it at some point. We were doing a large edition once of a print. It's like edition of 300, and it was going to be 60 colors, a street scene, Parisian street scene by Michel Delacroix. And Michel Delacroix always puts a dog. Actually, Michel Delacroix is the father of the owner of Axel Editions, and Axel, my former print shop, was named after the family dog. So there's always this dog in every... So the story is we were printing, and I was chroming, drawing all the films, and there's this giant area that wasn't printing, in my eye, like the size of a dime, right in the middle of the print. And I, very, let's just say, distressed, talked to my colleague who was printing, like, how did you miss this giant thing in the middle? And he said, I thought it was going to be the dog. I thought you were like trapping for the dog. And like, the dog's over here. So, but we knew that we had 40 more colors to print, right? It was no big deal. So this is the same thing with handling a print. If it has a lot of color, a little imperfection here or there will be lost. And you're right. The hardest colors are the biggest, flattest areas of color. And it's true with also, I think, deckled edges. We're a fan of just straight trim, but deckled edge is nice because if the edge gets dinged, you can just create a little decal. And no one will know, right? You can sort of like pick it off, the ding.
Yeah, you're right about that. Okay, so I hate to make you do this. Can you explain screen print in the original conception with the ruby lith and everything, and how that works, and then how it's changed over time? Do you mind?
No, I don't mind at all. And I come from a generation that learned all of it pre-computer.
Right.
So, and use computer every day as well. So the screen printing process is a stencil process. A screen of various mesh counts is stretched over a frame. Originally they'd be wood frames. Now, by and large, I use metal. The mesh might be anywhere from like 70 threads in an inch, which is like not a tennis racket, but it's like not going to stop a mosquito from flying into your room if you put it on your window, up to, in our case, 420 threads per inch, which is finer than the sheets I sleep on. So the thread count, if you will. So the amount of thread determines the deposit of ink. So if you have a lot of threads, you can put little precise details in a thin deposit of ink, and big coarse threads, you can put massive amounts of inks on something. So we select the mesh depending on what our application is. The traditional way of screen printing, as I was taught by Philip von Rabe at the Ohio State University, is to paint out the screen with a stop out. So you would everywhere that you seal the mesh, ink won't go through, and everywhere you have open mesh, ink will go through. So imagine your screen door, and the air is flowing through all those holes. And now if you slap a piece of paper on that, the air is only going through where you have the open mesh. So that's the principle, is to open and close that mesh. So traditionally, one might use paper to create a stencil on a screen and use the ink to hold the paper on the screen. So you could cut tissue into a shape and ink that, and the ink would hold the paper onto the screen. Eventually, people started painting with something that they could remove. These screens, once we put an image on, we print it, we take the image off, regardless if it's a handmade screen or a modern photomechanically made screen. So for every color that you see in a print, a screen is made. That's our matrix. In the days before computers, we would hand paint out, and you could just use Elmer's glue. There's a wide variety of things you could use to keep the screen closed versus open. And the modern approach eventually became photomechanical. So you would coat the screen with a photosensitive emulsion, which, by the way, is generally Elmer's glue. It's white glue. It's PVA that's been dyed and has a photosensitive chemical, diazo, put into it. So you coat the screen with a photosensitive emulsion, and then you expose that to light with a positive film, creating your stencil. So you expose the light. Everywhere that's black on the film blocks light, and everywhere that's clear on the film allows light to pass through, and that sort of catalyzes the photoemulsion. And everywhere that it's catalyzed, it becomes impervious to water. And everywhere that is blocked, is this making sense? Is everywhere that the light is blocked, just washes out with water, and we end up with a stencil. A stencil on a mesh matrix. So this is an old process that predates the books on the dawn of screen printing. There's some great dawn of screen printing that puts the dawn of screen printing in the early 1900s. And that's true in sort of Western approaches, but the original paper stencils were paper on a screen held by single threads, of ink. Single threads holding the paper to the frame, and you would sort of pounce the stencil. So the origins go back a long time. The era that I started at, we would make films. If there was a photo images, we'd make them in a copy camera. We need to make halftones, we would put a photograph or a piece of art in a copy camera, and that would the image would go through a lens and onto film. But before it hit film, it would go through something called a halftone screen, which was a filter. Was a sheet of film with dots on it. Each dot was 100% black in the absolute middle. 1% black is what I'm trying to say on the very outside. So every single dot in that halftone screen was a continuous tone.
Wait a minute. I always thought that the halftone dots, the little circles, were on, off, black or clear.
So they are by the time they get on the film. So if you imagine the film being the thing that the matrix you're shooting on your screen or putting on your litho stone or your litho plate, yes, by then it's on, off. But now when we use Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever your halftone rip software is to create a halftone dot, it's literally on or off. The computer, the math decides on or off. But in the copy camera days, the line screen, and that's why it calls them lines per inch, not DPI, dots per inch, because the line screen didn't have to be dots. It could be lines. It could be squares. It could be whatever, right? The line screen was a filter that you would put on, and it had dots that were these perfect gradients. So if the light was bouncing off something that is white and going through the lens, it would have so much light that would basically blow out the dot completely. It would overexpose that dot. If not much light was bouncing off, then the light couldn't penetrate the 100% dot, which is in the center of each dot, and couldn't penetrate the continuous tone gradient that surrounded the dot. So if this is making sense,
no, it is.
Then kudos to everyone who this made sense to. But imagine a perfect gradation of a circle with very black in the center and not black at all, and the amount of light bouncing off the surface of the object you're recording would obliterate the dot. So you have this field where some areas would be black, and so no light is bouncing off of those surfaces, so those dots became solid, right, and big, And then the white areas, the light is bouncing off and obliterating the dots, and they're becoming very tiny.
So the dots sort of merge in the black areas, kind of?
They stay in the, they're touching each other. Yeah.
Well, that's my question. So each dot, the 1% is abutting the next 1%.
Pretty much,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's so you're learning this stuff. And by the way, there's also you are filtering out CMYK at the same time by using the opposite colors. So you're filtering out everything but blue, right?
Right.
So that only the blue can come through, and you're using a filter to filter out everything but the magenta, so you're only getting the magenta. But then there's no way to filter out everything but the black, right? So that's why we don't use the word CMYK. The K stands for key line, because you would make a high contrast black and white photo to do your K, right? So you're just like, there's no way to filter out the black. So the key line, K is for key line, and that's the final thing that you put on, this high contrast, little touch of black.
I always thought the K was just for black.
Yeah, black. Yes, exactly. Or to distinguish, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's so.
But so, Luther, how in the world without computers, did they make those screens back in the day? Halftone. How did they make those with this continuous?
So the halftone, right, is pre-computer. So once you come up with your dark, and so by the way, you're taking a photo, right? It's going through the filter, your line screen. You're then getting a piece of exposed film, and then you're running it through a developer, darkroom, traditional darkroom mechanics, developer, fixative, right? Stop bath, all that stuff. And then that you're using, at that point, you're exposing that on your screen. You coat your screen with a photosensitive emulsion, and you're exposing that on your screen. I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly when people started using photosensitive emulsions, but it was a sort of thing where you would make your own photosensitive emulsion. You would buy the raw materials initially. You would buy polyvinyl acetate, white glue, also known in the industry as Elmer's, right? So, right? So you'd buy your Elmer's glue, or you buy your white glue, and you would mix in your own diazo, your own photosensitives, and then it would be like, if you've ever put a lump of Elmer's glue on something, it sort of dries like a yellowish amber color. And then if you wanted to see it, you'd add some dyes to it. So photo emulsion for screens, the color of it, it could be any color, right? So origin story of that is there was a way of just making it, and everyone just made it. So, but meanwhile, by the way, there were no computers. So when I learned with Jean-Yves Noblet, I think he liked the fact that I used to run the photo mechanics for printmaking darkroom at Ohio State. So I got to do this stuff, and Jean-Yves had a darkroom and an enlarger. So I got to do a lot. We would be handed a Donald Batchelor little painting, and I would separate out the colors in the camera. But then you're taking out those films, and you're drawing on them, and you're airbrushing on them, and you're blocking them out with Ruilit and Amberlit, and you're adding to the film that you've done in the copy camera. So that's the beautiful thing about that era, was like every mark was made either in camera or by hand, and you were painting on the films.
To make sure that everything came through. You weren't
to create traps, to trap colors, so that there was no misregistration, or airbrushing acetate ink onto the acetates on the film, so that you could get some gradient dots that weren't halftones. So when we started working at Excel, I was doing everything by hand. Litho crayons on acetate. You take a photo. We had no enlarger at that time, so we would take a photo of the painting or drawing or whatever, print it out, and glue it to a piece of wood, and like a piece of masonite, draw registration marks, and just slap a piece of acetate on, draw your registration marks, and just draw the colors you saw, one at a time. Meanwhile, I was working with Photoshop at home, and wow, you know what? I think I could do this all in Photoshop. So now, using the color select tool and layers and Illustrator and Photoshop, you can really build a print. And there's a whole generation that's all they know. But having the ability to draw on those things post is really important too. That the human touch and the human mark of ink is really, it's hard to fabricate digitally.
So even now with Photoshop and everything, you still go in and add in the trapping and stuff?
There's a lot
Huh.
that we're still not adding in trapping. We try to do that very quick in Photoshop.
Sorry.
But if one wants to like add some nuance and be spontaneous, yeah, we will still draw in airbrush in stuff, which is a lost skill of airbrushing films.
Oh gosh.
You know.
Okay, so now you've got this computer generated, dicked around with Photoshop situation, and you're printing out films, and then you're exposing them on your. So it's
exposing
easier.
Yep. It's very fast. It's very fast. As I mentioned, those days before the computer, the chromists, the person drawing each color separation, would have to draw as fast as the printers were printing, if not faster. And so there would become this press check moment where you're like, I don't really like the way this is drawn, right? And then you would add to the film, reshoot the screen, or scrap the film entirely and start all over. And I would put down production here, Photoshop, be like, I need to tweak this quickly, right? Quickly make edits. There's no going back, right? You quickly make edits, plan out 5 layers in advance, sort of get a digital feel for the way the colors might look, and send that to print. So the ease of the color separation, it's just so fast now. And back in the days when I was doing everything by hand, some tricky colors, I'd be up all night so that we could print it in the morning to meet the deadline, right? So you're drawing all night long, and then, there better not be, and you're scratching off things that you overdrew. You're scratching off with a razor blade, or you sharpen a chopstick and you rub it off. There's all these, you're masking out with tape, you're peeling tape off. It was a messy, slow process, but it had all the prints from that era have an aesthetic of that mark making.
Wow. So what happens when the thing that you are the original image that you are trying to create into a print has inks that aren't on the shelf? Like who does the color matching, and is there any test other than the human eye?
So there are ways to do computer matching of colors these days. We don't do that. We still use our eyes. We hand mix all the colors that we're going to print. Every ink company has your basic colors. And when I started, I started with cyan, magenta, yellow, black, white, and clear, and was attempted to make all the colors from that. But you're really limited because there's a lot of pigments that you can't get that way. And you can't just do it all with those colors. So the beauty of screen printing, and let's just say all of the print process is going get a real can of a real phthalo, of a real ultramarine, and printing that. So little dabs of color, you're slowly leaning in to what the color I want. In screen printing, we never want to go too dark, because you don't want to ever have to print to lighten up a color, but you can always print something to darken it. So you're always trying to creep up on it, but not go over. If we're planning out something that might be 60 colors, we start very quickly. We don't print lightest to darkest necessarily, which is how I was taught. We'll quickly get in our brightest white and our brightest black from the beginning, because we want that 100% white and the 100% black to balance the image out. And we might reprint the black at the end and reprint the white at the end, but we need it in the beginning so that we can judge our blues, our green, all the value range of our colors. And not at the end find out, and I learned this the hard way, not at the end find out when you put on your black that they're all wrong when compared to black. They're all too dark or too light when compared to your black. So we start quickly by getting our black and our white point down. And when a color isn't working, you can go to the pigment store, right? Where we have several here. My favorite is Guerra Paint Pigment. And they, are purveyors of fine pigments to a lot of the arts community here. You can buy them online. They have some of the last supplies of certain pigments. There might be, and this isn't literal, but they might have a blue that was only made in 1958 for 2 years of Porsche, making, and they might have the last drum of that blue on the planet. Right? And then sometimes they do. This is the last batch of this color, and after this, it's gone. It's hard to think that in this day and age that a color could go extinct. Right?
It is hard to believe. But there's so many companies that are like TW Smith. Is it TW Smith? Daniel Smith, excuse me. Wait, what? Why? How can you stop? Don't close.
Yeah. Yeah. And the realness of buying bulk calling in and finding out that you don't have your favorite black etching ink, right? And they have to make it for you. And then, but they need enough orders to make it, right? They're not going to make one can of ink, right? They have to have enough to make because you're using these mills and they're grinding pigments, and they have to have enough orders to make a big batch, right? So, and that's true with the pigments. And when you get into bespoke pigments, they're made by, giant chemical firms. And so, there might be a time when they make a bespoke color for Porsche, right? And then there's no need when Porsche stops using that color. So it's really interesting to think. Also, traditional, we had a color of blue that was coming out of Japan that we can no longer get. And it was a blue that was darker than our black. Oh. It was called Mallory. And it was a really, like the deepest blue you can imagine, and deeper than any black we could print. And it's just weird. So we would make these blacks that were actually 90% Mallory with a touch of black. Oh, wow. So they could get added. But then I guess the pigment to make that stopped being available. So we've never, that color of blue disappeared from our palette around 2005 or something, And by the way, it was meant to, because you touched that, went back to touching inks and handling prints. If you touched that print the wrong way, you had a blue finger, no matter how long it was drying for.
Oh, wow. So when you're working on an edition of 300, say, prints, and you don't finish that day and you have to remix those colors.
Yeah, no, you don't let that happen. No,
okay. All right, so that
yeah. No, that's like your nightmare, and it does happen. And it really happens. We try to overmix, so we're sure to have enough color to make it through the run. And sometimes, your big runs, you might be making a 5-gallon bucket of color. And the last thing you want is 3/4 of the way to run out of color and then have to remix it, because even though we're really good at it, we're going to get there 95% of the way. And we really pride ourselves on every print being the same. Maybe getting a 99. So when you know you're running low, you stop everything you're doing so that you can, we need 2 gallons and I have 1 gallon left. So you make another gallon, and then you mix them, and then you have the hybrid between the 2 batches.
Right.
But I learned the hard way. I did a suite of prints for Kara Walker, the backgrounds of the print. It was a portfolio, Emancipation Approximation, I think is the title of it. And they had a bunch of grays. So I wanted all the grays for all editions backgrounds to be the same. So I mixed something like 15 gallons of this gray and started printing. I didn't realize that the color oxidized, that colors could oxidize too. So I was into the second edition, and the gray was it was the same batch of ink. I mixed them all. I poured from one 5-gallon bucket into the other. I really took a whole morning making sure every bucket was the same, but they shifted over the long haul of the edition. So even there, just because you made it one day, you can't be 100% assured that it's the next day it's going to be the same. And when you hand mix pigments, some pigments have charges, they electric charges, let's call them magnetic forces, and they don't like other pigments. So they can self-separate overnight. And actually, we did a print with Alfredo Yar once where we did the perfect first proof of this beautiful red, the hand-mixed red. He approved it. And then we editioned it, and we came back the next day, and it was all marbleized. And we're like, well, that's weird. I don't know how we must have done something wrong. Let's just do it again. We did it again, it marbleized. And it wasn't until the third time we realized that the 2 reds we were mixing together didn't like each other. And in the time it took to pull the print, pick up the squeegee, and move to the puddle of ink to flood it, they would self-segregate. And this no man's land of muddy brown was the stray pigments that neither party of red would adopt. And when you flooded, it would create these streaks. So the solution was to create a giant screen and have this huge flood where no image was, and by the time you got to the image, the ink would be mixed. So we'd mix it. Anyway, God. So there's a lot of that. And part of the way, I didn't mention this, I went into school thinking I was going to be a scientist. So this is part of the joy. It's oh, that's so weird.
Isn't that cool?
Right? And oh my God, why is this happening? And then you start calling people and you're finding this stuff out. And every day it's something like that too. I've been doing this every day since the day I fell in love with print, and every day there's some new nuancy thing to learn. And we don't make the same mistakes every day, but we make mistakes every day. and they're just more creative and more expensive mistakes.
Right. Is there a plan in the print shop of Powerhouse Arts to publish?
That's a great question. We are currently publishing our first print with our artist in residence. His name's Ivan Ford. I can hardly wait to release it to the public because it's a hybrid. You can imagine, right? It's like one of the beauties of publishing is that, and just a little record keeping. I and Glenn Baldridge, we started a company called Fourth Estate to publish work from 2005 to 2015, I believe. I may be butchering those years, but we started Fourth Estate as a way of working with artists that we wanted to see make prints. And I was in a print shop doing contract work, and he was at CRG Gallery meeting wonderful artists. And so we ended up, after hours, getting a six-pack, hanging out, making prints, right? And building some sweat equity in the Fourth Estate. And I have to say, the beauty of publishing as a printer is you can really say, like, here's an idea I have and what artists would be responsive to it. And we can take a chance because it's our own work. So this next edition with Ivan Ford, hopefully coming out in the next few months, is going to be a hybrid between like 3 processes. So it's going to be fun. And then we have some other projects coming up with Julia Wachtel and Alex Dodge that are going to be some fun experimental prints as well.
Cool.
So we met to speak of the future, and we have some future techniques that are going to come out that I'm really excited to reveal. So more on that later.
Yeah, Glenn Baldridge came and vended at the Baltimore Contemporary Print Fair at the museum. He shared a booth with Phil Sanders.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember that well.
And yeah, no, I was hoping you guys would keep publishing.
Yeah, so when Fourth Estate ended, we never had a brick and mortar space. We relied on all the print fairs, such as yours, to really seed the money for the next year's publication. And we did not adapt well to the online sales platform. We really relied on like in-person impulse buying, which worked for many years. At the EAB fair, I think Baltimore sent a bus down of collectors, and the collectors would roll in and they would spend like cash money, and you were like going and you were buying paper the next day with that money. And so and then when that slowly segued into like, can I have your card? I want to think about this purchase. That was sort of where we didn't not having a brick and mortar space, not truly being online salespeople.
Got it.
Now I think there's a lot of really amazing publishers who are really strictly online. Avant Arts, JRP Edition. There's a bunch that are really really good online sales platforms for prints. And I think that the beauty, once again, of print is its multiple nature. So I think there's a new day of online print sales.
Yeah, we can only hope. Yeah, I did want to ask you about your feelings of the state, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to most of the guests about it just because, things are shifting and changing, not only because of the pandemic, but just because of shops retiring. And, I feel like I'm worried.
Yeah. So the state of the state, in my mind, is strong. I think education is the key to the state of the state. We need, as creators in the medium, to really spend more time explaining what makes a fine art print, whatever the means of manufacture are. I don't think that we've done a very good job of that. Because of our lack of ability to communicate its specialness, I think we've missed a generation of collectors who've really worked on collecting toys, limited edition toys, shoes, street art, quote unquote, this like collectability mindset, flipping culture, limited purchase, 2 prints per purchase. We were using an old paradigm. I think we're now in a state, because we have social media, we can really focus on what makes fine art prints and fine art in general special. And so, and it should be our mission, right? And thank you for hosting me, because I'm passionate about this and it needs to be talked about. And the more people that make, the more people that can handle, that can sniff and smell. I mean, that's a huge part of it for me. It's like the more that the nuance becomes apparent.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I'm also saying, like, as I'm saying this, and there's 8,000 units of condos going up around us on the Gowanus Canal. There's an 80-story condominium that's ready to, 80 stories. I
80,
joke that that's
yeah.
more white walls going up at any time than probably all the museums in New York put together. If one thinks about this development as like a Gold Coast for hanging stuff in frames on walls, that's really how you have to think about the opportunities too.
Sounds like you need to put on a print fair, Luther.
Yeah, I know, right? And more on that later.
Yes, we're in discussions, people, just so you know.
Yeah.
Haven't figured it out yet, but we will.
No, it will happen. And so I think really having people understand what collecting is and fine art. And, I had a print collector once tell me, I was like, how do you collect? And he's like, if I like it and I can afford it, I buy it. And so as someone with no money, I would go into fairs and like, wow, look at this print. It's only $500. And and for me as a printmaker, that was a lot of money, but $500 now. And I'm looking back and kicking myself for not purchasing the Christo beautifully. There's a Christo print that I won't forget because it instructs a lot of the way I make prints now. But it was a little sculpture. And I'm like, why didn't I get that at the time? I loved it. And I stood in front of it for 15 minutes, right? Oh. And why didn't I just figure out how to get it? So I think, a lot of the limited edition aspect of print and that the new sales platform are buying into, these time releases and, there's only this amount of time to buy is like the new buying bug, it's like they're buying into people's collecting mentalities. I don't think we've been good at that. As an industry.
I mean, the discussions about quote unquote originality, which bumps up against multiplicity, of course. It's where I just had a conversation last week with Susan Tallman about this very idea of what the fine art original, the misnomer original and all that stuff, and how that it was really interesting because she wrote in her amazing book, The Contemporary Print from 1996, about the Print Council picking up this idea of the original print, and that's the term that they were using to try and put forward fine art print collecting, that it was a mistake because prints can never be as original as unique works in painting, sculpture, and drawing. Like you already set yourself up for failure because you will never be that original.
Yeah, and it's so hard explaining.
Right.
Well, here's why it's original.
Yeah. And even the word print, I want to circle back to because it's in the vernacular, but when I Google other podcasts that have to do with print, I'm getting the t-shirt print people. I'm getting the you name it. So print doesn't only mean us.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
I wish there was better vocabulary, honestly.
No, we should own up to. We haven't done a great job of this. And I think it was Southern Graphic Council, West Virginia, Dave Hickey was invited to speak, and it was a packed auditorium, and he really cut into us big time. And I was like a graduate student, and all the students are clapping and giggling and cheering, and professors are getting up and walking out. And he was like, he came in there to shake things up. He was like, you have lost your mercantile roots. Your noses are too close to your plates. You're missing the bigger picture of what the art form is. And this is me, 25 years later I've looked for this speech so many times I can't find it. As someone just basically entering this industry, the fact that people are booing and getting up and leaving is making me embrace this as a young person even more. Like, wow, this person is a tap to the pulse of something, right? But I think without the full ability to remember what the speech was, the idea of fine art prints as original as being something that was completely removed from the rest of the world of printing was, in Dave Hickey's mistake, a big mistake. And so when coming to New York and being asked to print on glass for an architectural window or whatever it is, there's so many things that print can be. And it was really eye-opening for me because silkscreen is this very adaptable thing. Smushing some ink onto whatever you can. So I think that we embrace print here as like part of a sculptural process too. It's not a one thing, and the idea of something being original we don't even bring up. Like, we made 10 of these things, or we made one of these. And when you make a unique print, it is an original.
Right. Where do you see you in the shop in 5 years?
There's a lot that we have planned for the next 5 years and are hoping to roll out. Much of what we're trying to do is, as I mentioned before, about educating the public about fabrication and what that means. And also how fabrication, arts fabrication can, we don't want to be like an alien ship that's landed in this community of Gowanus. We want to serve the needs of the artists here. So fabrication and how that develops over the next 5 years with the community needs is going to be really important. A large part of what we're trying to do is also some workforce development so that people who didn't necessarily get a chance to go to art school and take a continuing education in print can get access to some skills so they can pursue some of their own making. So that is being rolled out over the next 5 years in sort of spits and spurts as we develop robust programming and the development needs, the fundraising needs to support them. There is a huge need in Brooklyn, and I imagine in most people's neighborhoods, to have resources available for people to make art and make mistakes that don't. So this is key thing that we all have to acknowledge is that often when we are in the process of making, mistakes are costly. And if you're an artist that is making a choice between making a $10,000 commissioned work and rent, right? There's this balancing act between how self-funds. So we're also trying to make an environment where, because we have a very thoughtful approach to making, we can either circumnavigate mistakes or that mistakes aren't as costly, right? So that, you know, the print we have 8 seasoned printers in the print shop, and we've made millions of mistakes. So our hope is to navigate away from mistakes, but also navigate into why mistakes are fun, right? So this is a very roundabout way of saying, like, artists shouldn't have to make a choice between paying their rent and making their art. So we're also trying to figure out how we can open opportunities to a wider audience of makers. And so that's an ongoing project, right? That'll never end.
Right.
And it's just never going to end. But then you're stepping into Powerhouse Arts, which, you know, has master craftspeople in ceramics. So you're like, well, wow, wouldn't this be great if we could put a little bit of this chemical X from the ceramics into it? So, and then we lean in on their expertise. The 5-year plan we have a small metals shop, jewelry that we're hoping to open soon. We have a small wood shop, and we have some ancillary departments that aren't activated that we're stewarding that we hope to open. And in the next year, I can't speak to some of the initial entries into the building that are going to happen, but over the next years, there's some really exciting programming that's going to be happening.
That's cool. There's a institution in Baltimore, a nonprofit called Creative Alliance, and they have a program where artists get into a lottery and they win or are granted a 3-year studio living space, so that no rent, you know. Yeah. And that Amy Sherrill, actually, the first time I did a studio visit with her, she had one of those studios, and she was living there in this little loft space up above it. And you know, I feel like that's a model that can be transformative for people. Not that you guys built that into your thing, but something to think about.
Yeah, well, there are some really interesting subsidized studio spaces in New York, and I know artists who enter into those agreements, and they are life-changing. For an artist that is, these, as you said, these are transformative moments when you can give someone access to space that is not in their home, that they're not necessarily paying for. Then they can choose to buy materials that they might not take a chance with if they have to pay the rent. And I'm not saying that's, we're currently figuring out how to subsidize projects ourselves. For a while, pre-pandemic, we briefly entered in a pay-what-you-want way of working in the print shop, which was very exciting, and it was short run because of the pandemic. And then post-pandemic, we were a little bit more targeted with subsidizing, where we pay for 50% of the production costs, but not necessarily materials. And so I think that, hopefully that is something we can bring back. It's important to note that we are also in a time period where materials themselves are really getting hard to find. There's paper shortages, there's ink companies going out of business. There's currently a foam core shortage that there's a giant pandemic consolidation of foam core manufacturers, and they decided to, from what I hear, cease all production of foam core so they could just use the overstock, and then there was no foam core.
Wow.
So if you're also talking about buying power of buying bulk, right? As various arts organizations can buy reams of paper and big lots of paper, or be donated, hint, hint, paper companies, donated paper. Hopefully that's a way that we can subsidize work as well. And we swim in ink that we've made for projects. And as we mentioned earlier, we make more ink than we are going to print because we are afraid of running out. So we also, where does that ink lie and how can that ink be distributed? It's water-based ink of a high quality. And that's something you can do as a larger arts organization. Have a repurposed room, where materials that aren't needed anymore can go and other people can scrapyard.
Oh, nice.
We don't have that in play yet, but that is something.
Oh, that's a great idea.
That one can do, yeah.
In your thought about education being paramount, what can people like me do to help the ecosystem? I mean, I'm like yelling as loud as I can through the podcast, but like...
And organizing fairs, that's beyond, yeah.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's really a unique question for each. I think everyone has to address that in their own skill set. So there needs to be a showcase. We need to be able to talk about the art form, and we need to be able to create those showcase moments. So IFPDA and before that EAB fair here in New York, where people would come to New York to experience print, but then you would go into the general public, and even my printmaking students, like, this is a print fair weekend, you really should go, right? But you need that added enticement of what that means. Like, your tickets are free, I'm paying for your access. Still, not enough to get people to go to the fairs who aren't implicitly interested in that. So I think that merging this concept of multiple and print is really important, that we're not working in isolation, that people can come and to appreciate one thing and get exposed to another. And that's what museums and galleries do so well, right? You're coming in to see one art form, but it being exposed to the entire history of the art form at the same time. And I don't think you can do this on your own, obviously, Ann, but we really, as advocates, as people who profess, I think that we need to create as many opportunities for people to engage in the tactile quality of these things as a museum would, right? So that becomes difficult in a landscape where, at least in New York, it's a repeat of Dwayne Reed's Starbucks, whatever the repeat is, there's not a lot of places to have educational facilities as to art, right? So then you're learning about this through our major institutions, our museums, our galleries, and our art schools. However, not everyone feels comfortable in those spaces. So how does one make comfortable spaces? I once was a sole person working a gallery, and we opened the doors, and people would still stop at the door and ask if they could come in, right? This is a gallery, right? And I was amazed that people don't feel comfortable entering into these spaces where I just nonchalantly walk in, start shaking hands, and talking shop, right? So, but by and large, most people don't feel comfortable, right? So these are not spaces that we create that are inviting. And so I think that where people do feel comfortable are, and it's grueling to work these week after week, are street fairs, craft fairs, are areas there where you can buy a hot dog and you can look at art at the same time. Making ourselves available is really important. In New York, we have a lot of zines. Zines are doing it really well. Zine fairs, and you're contributing to zines, you're making zines, you're purchasing zines, and it is a culture unto itself, and they know how to sustain themselves as a culture.
At $5 a pop.
Yeah, exactly. So, prints, you can do amazing prints for $5 a pop, right? But you can also do amazing prints for $3,000 a pop. So how does one get one creating this precious, unique things at a lower entry point too? And I think the fortunate thing in New York with gallery real estate is not going to be spent on a $50 print. That wall space is precious. Those rents those galleries pay are astronomical, and they need to be selling high ticket items. They don't want to sell $100 things. That's a lot of emails and a lot of swiping cards and a lot of effort for, what is basically a low return. So as a group, we have to really create more moments where we can exchange with the general public what it is our craft and have a good entryway, right?
Right.
The gig poster was a phenomenal way of people to collect fine art quality print, because you're buying your favorite rock band. It's printed by a silkscreen shop that loves the process and is creating unique and beautiful, and the art is usually very compelling, right? And it's a poster, right? So we're talking about, once again, I'm like now skirting around like posters and fine art, right? We now have here Poster House in New York, one of our newer print museums, and they do a really good job of educating the public on what makes poster design so important. And next time you're in New York, general listeners, Poster House, by the way, it's free on Fridays.
Where is it? Poster
House is an incredible institution for engaging in some of the best printing and graphic design you can imagine. So check them out. But they are systematically approaching what culturally these print forms do to us, right? And eras of print and eras of design and eras of impactful messaging, right? Mine doesn't quite do that way the way posters do, right? So, it's a different energy.
Yeah, no, posters sit at a very interesting point in between commercial and fine art. Yeah, fascinating. All right, so is there anything we haven't covered that between Miranda and me you forgot to say?
Oh God, there's a lot that I'd like to. I have some.
We're gonna have a part 3.
Yeah, we might have the part 3. I've got some like fine art printing conspiracy theories to get into. No, no, I do. I do. That's for another one. We have to have we'll have a sidebar to do some history of printmaking as mercantile roots and as a great fine art hustle from the 80s. And there's a lot of topics in print because image making, as your podcast greatly covers, is so diverse, right? Yeah. And it's such a big industry. So yeah.
Okay.
I do want to talk to you about this.
All right.
Conspiracy
we just do
theory.
A bonus episode.
Yeah. And I need some fact checkers, and I need some accountants, some historical accountants on this stuff. And there's a
okay. All right.
Side story.
Sounds like a book.
I know. Or a movie. Or a movie.
Right.
I'm thinking big here.
There you go.
Got to get everyone. And
who's going to play
really
you?
Nice print conspiracy theory will really get people collecting prints again.
Who's going to play you in the movie?
Oh, I was a baby during these times, so I'm innocent of all of this historical reenactment. More on this later.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming on Platemark, Luther. There's obviously wonderful things happening up there, and next time I'm in New York, you're on my list. So
okay, yeah, please.
Yeah. And I assume you welcome other people to come and take a tour.
Yes, absolutely. We have back to the non-gatekeepy kind of way of working, we have artist experience coordinators who are managing tours of the facilities, because we can't have tours constantly. People constantly want to come through there. So they're managing some of the tour dates. I'm not sure when you're going to release this, but September 23rd of this year, we're having an outdoor event here at Powerhouse that is open to the public. We have high expectations for what that might be. As we steward these spaces and they get more and more populated, there'll be more and more ways of accessing this building, not just through our events and our tours, but also through other workshops that'll be running. So more of that come. You can join our mailing list at powerhousearts.org if you want to stay informed.
Can one become a member, a supporting member?
Yes, one can become a supporting member. There is a donate button on our website. There's many different ways that we are looking for sponsorship, or I should say partnership, or I don't even know the vernacular because I don't swim well in these waters. But yes, there's multiple ways. And if you're out there considering donating to an arts organization, we have a robust way of supporting the arts envisioned for the future.
Well said there, Mr. Spokesperson of Powerhouse Arts. That's awesome. All right. Well, so on behalf of Miranda and Hello Print Friend and me and Platemark, thank you for doing your twofer interview with us. I think
pleasure.
it's so exciting to see this new space opening up, and I see great things in your future. So it's a thrill for us.
Thank you. And I'll see you in person soon.
You will.
All right.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Luther Davis of Powerhouse Arts. Hopefully you've gone over to Miranda's podcast, my sister podcast, Hello Print Friend, and listened to his origin story. I think together you're going to get a real good feeling for Luther and all of the wonderful work he's doing. He's been at it a long time and is as big a cheerleader for the print ecosystem as I am. Thank you to him for being such a willing and wonderful guest. And as usual, a thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And a thank you to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for helping me with some early editing and sound adjustments. I have no idea what I'm doing with sound. It's so opaque to me. All right. We will see you next time.